animation illustrates the objective of this course, providing credit providers an operational guide to the task team agreements and the statutory debt review process. The National Credit Act enforces a specific transition in credit recovery. It replaces isolated account-by-account collections with a coordinated, industry-wide restructuring of a consumer's entire debt portfolio. Navigating this system requires the credit provider assessment agent to abandon passive acceptance. Your role demands active oversight, rigorous data verification, and good faith engagement with debt counselors. This timeline maps the 60-day statutory lifecycle we will use as our operational framework. We will track a fictional over-indebted consumer, Mr. Majosi, from his initial application all the way through to his final clearance certificate. Moving a consumer successfully through these phases requires meticulous adherence to procedural triggers. A delay of even 1 day at a critical juncture can derail the entire negotiation. Active participation and precise timeline management are the only ways to ensure the protection of your institutional assets while maintaining strict statutory compliance. Phase 1 initiates with a specific statutory trigger. The debt counselor completes a Form 16 consultation with the consumer and issues a Form 17.1 notification to the entire credit market. Simultaneously, the debt counselor must log the application into the National Credit Regulator's Debt Help System. The consumer is immediately flagged with status code A, indicating their application is under assessment. Receiving the Form 17.1 and verifying this status code A creates an immediate legal mandate for your institution. You must halt the extension of any new credit to this consumer and pause standard collection actions. This graphic highlights the 3 specific fields you must provide to the debt counselor. You have exactly 5 business days from the receipt of the Form 17.1 to issue an accurate certificate of balance. Providing the exact outstanding balance and original contractual terms is necessary because these figures form the baseline data for the mathematical restructuring that follows. You must also calculate and provide the exact date of default. This data point is mandatory. It ensures the debt counselor software correctly applies the strict induplum capping rules, which prevent interest and fees from exceeding the unpaid principal debt. If you fail to meet this 5-day deadline, Regulation 24.4 invokes a severe consequence. The debt counselor is legally permitted to calculate their restructuring proposal using the consumer's estimated figures, which are almost always artificially low. Before issuing the certificate, you must audit the account for Section 130 legal exclusions. If your collections department commenced formal legal enforcement on an account prior to the debt review application, you must instruct your agents to flag and exclude that specific debt from the restructuring process. You must also verify the debt counselor themselves. There is a modern operational risk of scam call centers placing consumers under debt review without proper consent. It is mandatory to independently verify the debt counselor's credentials on the National Credit Regulator portal. Failing to verify credentials or missing the 5-day certificate of balance window surrenders your negotiating leverage entirely and guarantees you will receive a flawed restructuring proposal. Phase 2 begins with the Form 17.2b trigger. This is the statutory document declaring that the debt counselor has concluded their assessment and confirms the consumer is officially over-indebted. You must watch for the simultaneous submission trap. This occurs when a debt counselor lazily submits a Form 17.1 and a Form 17.2 at the exact same time. By submitting both forms concurrently, the debt counselor bypasses the mandatory legal assessment window. This renders the proposal invalid, and it removes your legal obligation to halt active deductions. When the protocol is compliant and the Form 17.2 arrives staggered appropriately, the rule is strict. The credit provider is legally mandated to cancel all debit orders and payroll deductions within 3 days. This budget table demonstrates the core affordability framework you use to audit the assessment. The industry refers to this as DCRS Rule 0. Rule 0 legally demands that the consumer make necessary aggressive lifestyle sacrifices. You must verify that the debt counselor has slashed non-essential entertainment and luxury spending to free up capital to repay creditors. This requirement extends to physical assets. If the consumer possesses secondary holiday properties or recreational vehicles, the debt counselor must mandate their liquidation to maximize the distributable amounts available for debt settlement. This leads to a foundational principle of the process. If adjusting the consumer's budget by eliminating luxuries frees up sufficient capital to cover their original contractual installments, the consumer is not statutorily over-indebted. Their application must be rejected. Once the budget passes the Rule 0 audit, the debt counselor will issue the formal Debt Counseling Rules System, or DCRS, repayment proposal to the agent's desk. Rigorously enforcing DCRS Rule 0 is your primary defense. It prevents credit providers from absorbing financial losses to subsidize an over-indebted consumer's unadjusted luxury lifestyle. The arrival of the DCRS proposal initiates a critical negotiation window. The assessment agent has exactly 10 business days to evaluate the mathematics of the proposal and issue a formal response. This split-screen comparison shows the first step of the audit protocol, verifying the input data. The proposal data on the left must align precisely with the original certificate of balance on the right. If the debt counselor used manual overrides to input lower balances, the mathematical integrity of the entire plan fails. The second audit step requires checking the mathematically generated repayment extensions and interest rate reductions against statutory limits to ensure the software hasn't breached industry parameters. The task team agreements enforce strict maximum term limits for these extensions. Unsecured debt can be extended to a maximum of 60 months, while vehicle finance can stretch to 84 months from inception. The system also mandates consistency. You must ensure that all credit agreements falling under the same specific category receive fair and equal proportionate allocation of the consumer's available funds. The ultimate test of a reasonable proposal under these guidelines is mathematical. The proposed structure must successfully solve the debt completely with an acceptable timeframe. If the DCRS proposal is mathematically flawless and respects all limits, the procedural response is straightforward. The agent must issue a standard letter of acceptance, securing a consensual resolution for the institution. If the proposal is flawed, the agent must issue a letter of decline. You cannot simply reject it outright. You must use only the standardized TTA reason codes to clearly articulate the material grounds for the rejection. To maintain good faith engagement, issuing a decline should immediately be followed by issuing a counterproposal to the debt counselor, keeping the lines of negotiation open. However, excessive back and forth carries a risk. Continuous counterproposals threaten the debt counselor's strict 60-day deadline to file the matter in the magistrate's court. Active auditing and strategic counterproposals force the process toward consensual resolution. Reaching an agreement at this stage saves the credit provider thousands of rands and contested magistrate's court litigation fees. Once a proposal is successfully negotiated, it must be translated from a temporary administrative plan into a binding National Consumer Tribunal consent order. A consent order confirmed by the NCT holds the exact same legal status as an order from the High Court. It provides the consumer with ultimate statutory protection against creditor enforcement, provided they maintain their payments. This flowchart maps the reality of the payment distribution agent waterfall. In Month 1 and Month 2, the consumer's payments are diverted laterally to cover the debt counselor's restructuring fees and the attorney's legal costs. Credit providers must set internal expectations correctly. You will generally only begin receiving substantial pro rata distributions from the third month onwards. Once distributions begin, the PDA handles the cascading rule. As a smaller debt is settled, the released affordability is proportionally added to the remaining accounts, actively accelerating the overall repayment timeline. The protection granted by the consent order is strictly conditional. If a consumer fails to maintain the restructured payment plan, your operational response must shift immediately. If a consumer defaults, and at least 60 business days have passed since their initial application, the credit provider is legally entitled to execute a Section 8610 termination for that specific credit agreement. Recent legal precedent confirms the strength of this action. Upon sending a valid termination notice, the debt review protection falls away immediately. You are not required to issue a subsequent Section 129 notice before proceeding directly to legal enforcement and repossession. In scenarios where a consumer faces a medical emergency, you may receive a Form 17.3 change of circumstances request. You are under no obligation to grant a total payment holiday. Instead, you should negotiate a temporary reduced payment that covers the interest, keeping the account from terminating. Relentless monitoring of the payment distribution agent statements and swift execution of Section 8610 terminations serve as your institution's final safeguards against uncooperative consumers. The ultimate objective of the entire 60-day debt review lifecycle is statutory consumer rehabilitation. When a consumer successfully settles their obligations according to the restructured court order, the debt counselor is legally empowered to formally issue a Form 19 clearance certificate. This interface shows the execution of the mortgage exception rule. A consumer does not need to pay off a 20-year home loan to achieve early rehabilitation, provided all short-term debts are settled and the long-term home loan is completely up to date. Upon receiving the clearance certificate, there is a final compliance mandate for the credit bureaus. They must permanently expunge the debt review flag, but they retain the consumer's rehabilitated historical payment profile. Rigorous adherence to the statutory mechanisms of the National Credit Act perfects a necessary balance. It ensures the protection of institutional assets while actively supporting the economic requirement of returning rehabilitated consumers to the credit market.